Today, I'm in Meridian, Mississippi at the Jimmie Rodgers Museum, and the sign says that the museum has been in existence since 1976. And I will tell you, this is not the first location of the Jimmie Rodgers Museum, as that was at the train depot in town. But they about 3 years ago, I think it was, they decided to move it to this location. As you can see from a distance here, there's a picture of Jimmie Rodgers on the door as well as some writing, and just give you a glimpse of what this beautiful old house looks like on the outside before we head on in. It's said that the house was built in 1905 and it was an optometrist's office for a while. And since Jimmie wore glasses, who knows, he may have come in here. But we do know for sure he's in here today, as it's got a lot of exhibits on display. It appears the writing on the door is a quote from country music legend Marty Stewart, and I'd like to read it to you. It says, "Every note of country music that is played, sung, written, thought about throughout this universe today, yesterday, and tomorrow, all goes back to one man, Jimmie Rodgers, the father of country music." And it, of course, has Marty Stewart's name at the bottom. First went through like a little sunroom before we got to the main entrance of the house. And I want to go back to some items that are in there also. But first I want to get the main things on Jimmie Rodgers that the house has to offer. And the young woman that was talking and giving tours, you might say, of the house today didn't want to be videoed, but she was willing to fill me in on a lot of information. And she said majority of the stuff in this house belonged to Jimmie Rodgers or was connected to him in some way. She said most of the furniture came from the house Jimmie Rodgers and his wife Carrie lived in Kerrville, Texas. Jimmie and Carrie had only moved there just a short while before his death, and they moved there because Jimmie was hoping that the drier air in Texas would prolong his life since he had tuberculosis. I'm going to try to get the reflection from the ceiling light off of this picture over the mantel. It's a very famous picture that most people have seen of Jimmie Rodgers at one time or another. Still get a little bit of reflection, but at least you get a pretty good idea of it. There's a sign that's below this black tuxedo in the case. It says in 1927, Jimmie moved to Washington, D.C. for a while. His suit was made at a shop on Pennsylvania Avenue. The tag inside says it was completed March the 20th, 1928, and it said that he wore it in many publicity photographs and on stage. And here's a look of a linen suit of Jimmie's. Something in this next display case has really caught my eye, and that's a guitar with the name of Jimmie Rodgers on the neck of the guitar. And when I asked the young lady about it, she said, no, this is a replica of Jimmie's guitar, that they have the original one, but it's on loan at the present time to the Birthplace of Country Music Museum in Bristol, Virginia. More about the guitar in a few minutes, but I wanted you to see Jimmie's like vest and boots and spurs, and even a custom-made hand-tooled leather bag that was made for Jimmie with his name on it. Most of Jimmie's songs were either written or co-written by his sister-in-law with him, and her name was Elsie McWilliams, and she was a sister to Carrie. And this is really neat. It's the piano, it says, used by Elsie McWilliams as she and Jimmie would compose their music, and she's the actual person that donated it to the museum here. The tour guide gave me such an interesting story on the two men that had their pictures above this piano, and that is of Hank Snow and Ernest Tubb. And they are very well known in the country music world for sure. But anyway, they were big fans of Jimmie Rodgers, and I know Ernest didn't ever meet him. I'm not sure if Hank did or not. But anyway, Hank Snow has a son that is a country music singer that is named Jimmie Rodgers Snow. And Ernest Tubb didn't meet Jimmie Rodgers, but he would later go to the house of Mrs. Rodgers, and Carrie, I guess, was so impressed with him and all, she helped get him launched in his career, it is said. And not only that, at that visit, she would end up having on loan to him Jimmie Rodgers' original guitar, the one that's in the museum at the present time in Virginia. And I don't think I got a good view there of it without the reflection, saying Jimmie Rodgers on that handle of that guitar with Ernest playing it. Ernest Tubb, she said, would end up playing Jimmie's guitar for approximately 40 years. And speaking of the guitar, she said it was estimated at a value of over $3 million. The next room I entered was a room dedicated to Elsie McWilliams. As I'd mentioned earlier, she was a writer, a co-writer with Jimmie of a lot of his songs, and has a lot of her memorabilia here, including an old Victrola that was given to her by Ralph Peer. And you ask, who is Ralph Peer? Well, he was a talent scout, a recording engineer, a record producer, and a music publisher as well. So she had a lot of connection with famous people. And here you see a guitar that Jimmie Rodgers purchased for his sister-in-law, Elsie. In the same case is a dress and fur coat that Elsie wore when she and Jimmie were inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. Now to what looked like to me a suitcase on wheels, but a very old one at that. But the tour guide told me it was the top part of the case of a slide guitar that belonged to Billy Burks, which was a band member in Jimmie's band. And here you're getting a good look at the slide guitar and its bottom half of the case. There's a picture with Billy Burks and even his brother Weldon, along with Jimmie, as they were band members of Jimmie's. Next, I'm going to be showing you a display case of personal items of Jimmie and Carrie Rodgers that their daughter, Anita, donated to the museum. You may want to pause the video to read some of the notes or take a closer look at the items. There are like Mason and Shriner hats that Jimmie wore, dishes that Jimmie and Carrie used, and there's other things too, including a postage scale that Jimmie used when answering his fan mail. And that quilt over there has really caught my eye, but I want to first look at this item here because it's kind of different too. And they called it, I think you pronounce it Grafnola. It's a record player, an old-fashioned one, as you can see, and it was just donated to the museum. It has nothing to do with being Jimmie's or his family members, but it does say that the couple that donated it had lots of parties and entertained, and they would play a lot of Jimmie Rodgers music on it. And I had to look to see if the record they donated with was one of Jimmie Rodgers, and of course it is. It's Waiting for a Train. There's also a small blue chair next to it that's got some information on it, and when I get closer, it says this was a handmade straight back chair that Jimmie made himself when him and Carrie first married. So that's kind of interesting, I think. On top of the case next to that chair is a picture of Billy Burke and his band. It shows him playing a steel guitar or slide guitar, if you want to call it that. And what's unique is that same guitar case is now without legs and all, but they do have it here on display at the museum, and there it is. Hanging on the wall above Billy Burke's picture is a couple of pictures of Jimmie's family members, and this shows a picture of his daughter, Anita, along with her son, Jimmie Dale, which I'm assuming was named for her dad. And then next to her is her mother, Carrie. And of course, they, in honor of Carrie, I'm sure that's the reason they got the small Jimmie Rodgers picture there at the end. Now we're going to head over to this bow tie type quilt that this lady made, and her name, I think it was Wally Starnes, it said on the quilt, and she made it in honor of Jimmie Rodgers, and it does to me look like bow ties, which would be a trademark of Jimmie Rodgers, but boy does this quilt have a story to tell. The lady ended up sending off swatches, small swatches I should say, of material to country music stars, and she would ask them to please sign their name on it and then send it back to her. And as you can see, she embroidered over top of those signature names that they did, and there's all kinds of famous people on here. She ended up making 4 of these quilts. 3 she gave to her children, and this one, of course, she donated here to the Jimmie Rodgers Museum. But you're going to see people like Loretta Lynn, Tom T. Hall, Dolly Parton, you just name it. And there is just so much on here that you can't name them all. But if you'd like to pause, you may get a better look at some of their signatures. And I thought it was kind of one that really stood out kind of at the top to me because it was turned sideways from the rest of them, was one that Jerry Reed had signed. Well, of course, you're seeing Roy Acuff there and Cal Smith, and up at the top there is where Jerry Reed signed his Sideways there. And it also has John and Jim Hager close to the top, and so many others. And I'm just going to go up and down it a little bit so you'll have a chance to look at it and maybe pause it if you want. There's a Charlie Pride right underneath where she gave her information, and she says, keep country music going. And I think it will go on for as long as time exists. And then back to some of the furniture, it came out of, like I mentioned, their home in Kerrville, Texas, mostly, it said. And so just get a good look at some of their chairs and everything. And we're going to look at the intricate designs on that one. And he called that, I mentioned earlier, Blue Yodeler's Paradise, the house where he lived at in Texas. As I give you a look around and everything, this would be a good time for me to say, I thank you so very much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have a blessed day. Also, if you haven't subscribed, I'd really love for you to, and give me a thumbs up would be nice. And as you take a look at some of Jimmie's personal items here, it really brings back that country music has got lots of stories to tell. There's the W.C. Handy Blues Award that Jimmie received for his Hall of Fame. And there's the songwriter one. You already seen Elsie's songwriter's trophy. And I'm sorry about the reflections. I wish you could have got a better look at some of these trophies and all. And I found the next one. I can't remember exactly what the girl told me it was, but it says on there that she was Elaine Wiseman Lifetime Achievement Award, but it looks like it's made out of a chalky type material, as some of it's scraped off or whatever. And the next one really reflected bad, and I'm sorry about that, because that is the Country Music Hall of Fame trophy that he got, and next to that is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee trophy. And above the trophy case there is lots of, looks like certificates or honors, I should say, of things that Jimmie got through the years. There's the RCA emblem there. And this plaque was presented to Jimmie by the National Music Council of Mississippi Federation of Music Clubs and Exxon, it said. And you may want to pause it if you want to read it all. And of course they have lots of pictures throughout the house of Jimmie. And this one I found very interesting. This is the Blue Yodeler's Paradise house that Jimmie lived in Kerrville, Texas. And up above it looks like somebody has painted the same picture there for him. And now you're looking at the table and chairs that he had out at Kerrville, Texas. And on the top of the table is a couple of photographs. And the first one down here is a younger picture of his daughter, Anita. And over on the other end is a picture of his wife, Carrie. And there's several of these pictures, if you've noticed throughout my video, on different walls in the house, and even got it on a poster of where Jimmie had a postage stamp made in honor of him. Also in this room is a display case of letters and pictures and different things. Jimmie, as you can see if you take time to pause it and everything, would write to his father, his sister, his brother. He was forever sending them letters and all. So I don't know if he was a homesick boy or he was just a dedicated person to his family. And I think it may be a little of both of them. If you want to skip over this part and don't want to take time to pause it to look to see who the letters were to or anything like that, be sure when you get to the part that you see a small picture, that is going to be a young picture of Jimmie Rodgers, and I think that's at least worth stopping to look at. Now we're going to head out to the area that I mentioned in the first of the video. It's called, I would call it at least, the sunroom. And the reason it's got a lot of good items out here, it's Blue Yodeler's Hall of Fame plaques you're going to see on the floor here. There's one for Hank Snow and Tanya Tucker. When I looked around in the room, didn't see one that actually had Jimmy's name on it. But the tour lady said she didn't know if there was more of these plaques out there because they're not all in the right order of years that they were given the plaques. They also weigh approximately 50 pounds or more, she said, and they didn't want to do any damage to the walls of this house as they're in the process of doing a fundraiser to build a new Jimmie Rodgers museum. There's Merle Haggard, and next to Merle is going to be that of Gene Autry. And anyway, they don't have a cost to get into the museum right now, but they do accept donations. And I say it's so very well worth it, as this is an awesome museum. The Marty Stewart plaque is smaller than the rest, and she didn't know if that was because they were getting low on funds or that was about the time that they were going to close. She didn't have a lot of information about the organization. I couldn't find a lot. If you know anything, please give me a comment on it below. There's a plaque here of Ernest Tubb and Ralph Peer, which I mentioned earlier in Elsie's room about him giving her that record player. And then there's also Sam Marshall, and as you'll see, there's just not a whole lot of them, but they're very interesting to look at. This is also a little section of a gift shop, so you can buy some few things and also give your donations. And this is a lighter reproduction of the bronze plaque that you would see at the graveyard where Jimmie Rodgers is buried.